What's going on, everyone, and welcome to Numbers Therapy. So a bit of background. We created Numbers Therapy originally to talk through the macro and bring on and showcase our experts in Metaverse HQ. And more specifically, so everyone can understand how all the big pieces fit together to make better decisions with NFTs and other investments using a balanced perspective, to learn about or from some of our people in the community, and to learn about different areas and opportunities out there, including different ways of thinking. More on Metaverse HQ, which we call MVHQ. MVHQ is the top Web3 trading and networking community, and we showcase traders, analysts, builders, and a variety of other rising experts in the space. Welcome, everyone, to Numbers Therapy, episode 47. Today's episode titled Appreciation of Appreciation. What that means, we will get into that as we go through this episode. Sounds a little bit funny, sounds a little bit weird. It's a thing. The purpose of Numbers Therapy is to talk through the macro, operational, financial, technical, trading-based, other dimensions of Web3 to help us all elevate. Of course, having some good laughs along the way. For everyone who's live, we have guest questions channel. Please feel free to drop questions in along the way, be it intro questions or more advanced. Even if they're questions that are regarding acronyms or other content, please feel free to ask in there. Lastly, Numbers Therapy is rated NFA, as in none of what you hear in here is financial advice. So, without further ado, and on to today's guest and episode. Guest has a cool background and is the epitome of what a career pivot looks like until you see how exactly it happened. From the UK, which in Numbers Therapy seems to be a bit of a theme as of late. What's particularly notable about him is the range of components he's incorporated into his projects, as well as the very thoughtful approach he takes to determining what exactly is happening within Web3 communities. You'll know him for Degens and Rektguy, way more than meets the surface on these. Very happy to have this guy as a new friend and colleague. Please, everyone, welcome OSF to the stage. Everyone, OSF, how are you doing today?
Hey guys, yeah, doing well, thanks. Thanks a lot for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, super excited to have you. I think it's going to be a pretty fun and interesting conversation, and one that doesn't come up within this space. So, start. In terms of getting some background in you pre-Web3. So if you can rewind back, X amount of years before Web3 was even Web3, can you take us through, for those not familiar, how you were spending your day-to-day?
Yeah, so I guess I started in Web3 a bit later than a lot of people. I first bought crypto in 2021, which is Bitcoin. So prior to that, I spent 10 years working at an investment bank as a trader. So I used to trade high yield and distressed debt and credit derivatives, and I did that for about 10 years before I launched into Web3 full time.
Okay, so it's that standard investment banking trading into artist.
Yeah, just that classic move.
Exactly, the one we've all come to expect. Initially, got you introduced to crypto? Like, how did you hear about it? Web3, and why were you so interested in it?
Yeah, so I think at the beginning of 2021, I sort of had this macroeconomic view on inflation, like lots of people. And at the time, I was living in New York, actually, and the book that I was trading just didn't really have any ways for me to express that view as a trade. So I started looking at doing it myself, like PA. And I looked at collectibles, I looked at art, looked at wine, whiskey, all that kind of stuff. And then I also started looking at crypto, and look, I've been a long time crypto skeptic. I think a lot of people from the traditional finance world are because of the way you're taught to learn and think about things. But I've eventually got my head around this idea of like Bitcoin is maybe a good inflation hedge, this idea of digital gold. So I bought some Bitcoin, and then fell down the rabbit hole to buy some ETH. And then because I was already looking at art and collectibles, NFTs just seemed like a natural thing to move on to, and it was just like this compounded asset of the thing that I was like wanting to purchase. So I bought my first piece of art in NFT format in March 2021, and then from there it was just like pure rabbit hole, and just fell down the hole and went into everything that I'm doing now.
Amazing. So, I mean, as you know, there's still people who are still cynics, in the financial world and even outside of it, right? And there's a spectrum probably that exists there, right? Some are just like ultra cynics.
just skeptical about a certain element or whatever. But, where do you think that comes from? Where do you think the cynicism then or even now comes from? And equally, if you remember, what got you across the line? Point, did you convert over where you're like, yeah, this actually may make some sense, and we need to think a little bit differently about, the payments world and the financial markets?
Yeah, look, I think the skepticism comes from the fact that people who work in traditional finance or who are investment professionals, you have this idea that you know how to correctly appraise investments and allocating capital, and you have this idea in your head that maybe you've studied at university, maybe you've done it in your job for some time, maybe you had some qualifications, and you have this idea in your head that you've seen asset prices move up and down, and you have a good idea of what affects them. And so when you look at something like crypto, you look at Bitcoin and Ether, and then when you look at NFTs, it's very hard to like specifically pinpoint the actual things that should affect them. And then like you have these price movements and they just go without being explained. And I think that's the thing that I had a tough time getting my head around. I was like, I just don't understand this as a product. I don't understand this as a concept. Like how, like, this price makes 0 sense. I think what I realized, what got me over the line is like, you don't have to understand where it's coming from. Like a market really is just buyers and sellers. And if enough people can be convinced of a story, they'll want to buy it and then the price will go up. And it is as simple as that. And that's just how markets work. And I think just, you got to simplify things in this world. You have to just break them down to basics. And that's why, you have meme coins and NFTs and a lot of like what people call low IQ players that actually perform very well. Which leave a lot of like professionals angry or cross, but at the end of the day, people are trying to overcomplicate things, and it is just very simple.
I mean that whole supply and demand thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. It was obviously not the intent to go down this route, but let's just stay here for a second because I think it's pretty interesting. Because I feel like if any of these classes, like NFTs, are a little bit easier to be able to ascribe some value to. So obviously there's like segments within there, right? So art, a little bit trickier, right? Because the same questions may exist, for traditional art, traditional non-digital art, right? Of why does a certain piece of art have value and so on and so forth, right? But outside of that, as you're starting to have projects that have membership benefits or other kind of, I feel like that's on the easier side of things to be able to figure out why a value exists. It may not be perfect. I'm not saying there's not emotional value that exists in there, brand value or whatever else. But I feel like that's on the easier side of things to determine. But on like the other end of the spectrum, which is I think, where you're starting right on crypto is, in traditional, financial world, right? You're taught to think through cash flows and terminal value and all that good stuff. And that just, you can't create a model. Like it's very, very difficult to create a model for crypto, it seems like. Do you agree with that, as a framework of like easier to value and harder to value within the Web3?
Yeah, like if you have something that gives you utility and I don't know, maybe it's like you own this piece and it allows you to mint these pieces and you can kind of like start to do, and you talked about cash flows, but you can start to do like some kind of a NPV calculate, a DCF calculation and figure out like what it should be worth from that from your expected dividends or airdrops or cash flows, whatever you want to call it. And it makes it a lot easier to value those things because it becomes just like an equation. It becomes a maths equation. And when you don't have that, which is what you don't get with utility entities and what you do get with just art, it becomes a lot more difficult because it's like, well, what am I looking at to value this other than just basic human sentiment and human appreciation? And look, there are still some stats you can do. Like if you're looking at an artist, you can look at like how many Twitter followers do they have? How many likes and engagement do they get on their posts? How much supply do they have outstanding? What's their unique holders and all that kind of stuff. Like those do play a part, but I do find, and I have found, like trying to collect art with that lens just never ends up being successful because you end up looking for things that you feel are underpriced based on the numbers. You buy it and you don't buy it for the art. You buy it because you think it's underpriced. And then you realize it never really reprices because everyone else is actually just buying stuff for the art. So it's definitely a gray and murky area, and there are lots of ways to look at it. But it's definitely a challenging one, I would say.
I think it's a super interesting frame that you're taking too, though, because what I'm kind of hearing is you kind of need to get a sense of like where this thing stands and maybe extend out your timing to some extent, right? Do I buy into this particular artist and the vision and what they're trying to do? Also tying in like what's going on in the macro markets and just kind of purchase from that vantage point, knowing that it's going to be really tough micro time unless you're maybe like a technical trader or something like that. It's going to be extremely, extremely tough to like micro time. Is that a fair distillation?
Yeah, I think so. And I think look, I think when you allocate your capital, when you buy things, you just have to decide what it is you're buying something for. Like, are you buying something to flip it? Are you buying something for a long-term investment? Are you buying something because you just like the underlying thing and want to own it? And NFTs can fit into all those buckets. It can fit into some of those buckets, and they're not mutually exclusive by any means. And obviously, if something hits all 3 points, that's when you know you can go in with conviction, right? But it's important to like just recognize that when you buy things. And I think where people trip up, and to to lose your question, like, is when you're like, oh, I have tricked myself into thinking that I am buying this art to support this artist and I believe in their vision. But deep down, the reason why you bought it was because you thought you'd make money on it. And then when you realize you didn't make money on it and there's no liquidity for it, then you're just in a tough spot. So a lot of it's about just like being honest with yourself when you actually make that purchase and make that decision to invest, and not like fool yourself into thinking something that you don't really think.
That's super interesting, and probably what I'm most excited to talk about today is like the reasons people buy things and all that, which is, I think it's a fact. Like maybe we should touch on this for a second. Like in your mind, just quickly to lay out a framework here. Like, what are the reasons that people buy art? Let's just take art because it's the most opaque one, right? The most opaque category and less rational. What are the reasons in your experience that people buy art that you've gotten your head around, right? Like if there was like a short list, let's say.
Yeah, so I think you my internet cut out in the second half of that question. If you just wouldn't mind repeating it.
Yeah, I was just saying, from your experience and what you've thought through, what are the reasons you'd say that people buy art at the end of the day? I know one of them you listed off is just pure depreciation or flipping reasons, right? But why else might, just breaking this apart, because we never spend time to really break this apart and actually spend time to discuss it. What are the other reasons you've experienced or thought through that people might be buying art in some cases?
Yeah, so I think something that is not talked about a lot is the social capital you earn from buying art. And it's definitely something that happens in the traditional world. Like if you're known to be a big art collector and you have a portfolio of some very famous artists, and especially in London where I am, where there's a big contemporary art scene, you end up meeting and getting to know a lot of people, and it will get you into like the best restaurants or the best members clubs and all that kind of stuff. And to an extent, I think Web3 is not that different. Like, if you own pieces from some of the best artists that are very closed communities with whales in them, and it does give you the look to like attend some cool events. It gives you the look to be in some very interesting group chats, and indirectly you kind of sometimes get that paid back to you because you may be in a really interesting group chat with some high profile collectors who have a bit of color or a bit of alpha on something that no one else has. So I think this idea of social capital, of being like, oh, I own an X copy 1 of 1, like I'm one of 40 X copy 1 of 1 holders, and there's this like elite crew of them, and I don't think that exists, by the way. It was just an example. But this idea of social capital, I think, is a really important one in terms of buying art. And the other thing is, like, I do think people care about art, and I think people want to support artists and want to support art within NFTs and support this movement of digital art. And the best way to do that is just to buy art. And I do think there are people out, believe it or not, I do think there are people out there who genuinely believe in that movement being pushed forward, and so they support it by buying art.
That makes sense. Just maybe layering on top there too, and I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, there's also probably some subtext in there too, though, right? For instance, like if it's a very established artist, long time, maybe there's like a little bit more confidence that exists. Okay, I can buy in here, my asset's protected, I can now, enjoy it, maybe long-term value, all that kind of stuff. And maybe like the newer side of things, is there maybe some subtext that exists in here too, which is, yes, I like the artist, and yes, I like what they're all about. But yeah, also they're really good at developing community, and also they're really good marketers and like that side of things too.
Yeah, I think marketing, the point of marketing is actually a really important thing because it's important in every aspect of life, but in this world where like everything is just like public, it's like Twitter, everything's on Twitter. startups are now basically NFT companies where you have a massive community watching what you're doing and asking questions all the time. And the way you communicate and market things are so important. And people may not have great substance or content, but they're just very good at marketing it, and they'll do very well. Someone may have a great product and great substance, or a very talented artist, but if they're not able to market themselves, then it will, go unnoticed forever. And I think the best analogy for that is like if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? And honestly, like, of all the different skill sets that you need in the space, I do think marketing is probably like the most important one to be successful. And it's a tough one to do because, like, there are ways you can market in a viral fashion, but it can impact you in the long run or impact your reputation because people may think you're a scammer or may think you're disingenuous and all that kind of stuff. So being able to like market in a way that is not only gets you the hype that you want, but is also sustainable for you to have like a long-term reputation is a very challenging thing. And I think something that only a few people can really achieve well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Really, really tough line to toe. And I mean, you have a bunch of fans in here, needless to say. So, I think they probably think you've been towing the line perfectly, is my guess. As we transition from Web 2 to Web 3, just one or two other questions kind of on my mind that I think would be interesting to talk about is, in the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and this is just theoretical. So if you don't, just curious to hear what your response is. And in the past 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, I see messages coming through my WhatsApp about my friends, more normie friends, raving about how NVIDIA has been shooting up, right? On the back of AI, the stock price has gone 2x or 2.5x or that kind of a thing. So they're super pumped about it. Wow, like great returns and all that. And everybody who's in here listening with you in the space knows that 2x returns is not exactly that crazy. There's, coins like you suggested that have gone, 1,000x or whatever, multiple of them, always, NFTs, so on and so forth. So with that in mind, any sense as to like why those normies are still not crossing the barrier? It seems like there's enough profit motive that even if you're skeptical, you'd still open your eyes and be like, what the fuck is going on? There's something I have to pay attention to here. Or are they're just segments you think that exist of people who are just very, very conservative and they're just not going to get there and they want more, I don't know if it's regulation necessarily or whatever, security, maybe they don't understand it. That's too hard to get them across despite those kind of headlines and that side of things.
Yeah, I think there's a few different things really. I think number one, there are still a lot of barriers to entry in this space. Like you have to, if you're a complete normie and you want to enter this world, you have to set up a MetaMask wallet. You have to make sure you write down your seed phrase properly. You have to have a centralized exchange so you can transfer some fiat. And there's just a lot of sunk costs, and it's a lot of effort to get all that stuff set up correctly. And you have to be really motivated to want to do all that stuff. And I guess that brings me on to the next reason why people are involved. Like, I think this space is so money driven and everyone wants to make money. And I think something we forget is like, not every single person in the world out there wants to make loads of money. I think a lot of people are just very happy with the money they make. They're very happy with the risks that they take in their lives, and they're very happy living those lives. So, you have to take all these steps to get yourself set up and get all the right equipment and the right software. You have to be really motivated to want to make money, not only make money, but also take risk. And there's a lot of headlines out there about scamming. You already know it's a little bit shady. It's a tough one to break into, I think. And so unless you're like heavily motivated, you're not really going to do it. And my answer to that is like, not 90% of people out there are that motivated by money as much as we think they should or would be.
It's interesting frame because I mean, I have segments of friends who are motivated by money, no doubt about it. But you bring up a really interesting point there, which is despite them being motivated by money, their heads are not there. And it almost seems like they're protecting themselves against themselves, much like not going into a casino almost, right? Where, as soon as you sign up for like the online casino, you're going to be sports betting constantly, and then you're going to go into degeneracy. And I don't trust myself to do that kind of thing.
That was definitely the case for me, by the way. Like I never really traded stuff on the side myself because I was like, well, if I'm trading at a bank and I lose the bank's money, it's fine because it's not my own money and I'll just get another job. But if I start punching around my own money in like crypto and NFTs and stuff and I start losing it, then it was like, do I trust myself to manage my risk appropriately and not just turn into gambling? And that was the thing that I had difficulty with.
Yeah, that's real. I mean, that's I guess not talked about a lot, but it's definitely a real thing. So, all right, well, so transition on the positive side things. You did, of course, decide to make the transition, as we all know. At what point, though, did you explore leaving your day job and becoming a project creator and kind of leveraging some of your art background? What was that kind of like transition period like?
Yeah, so I got kind of pretty deep into NFTs probably around April 2021. And at the time I was living in New York, I actually quit my job at the time to move to another bank, to move back to London. And when you move between banks, you basically get like 3 months off paid. Yeah, it's called your gardening leave. You get 3 months off paid. So I basically had 3 months off paid, and I went to stay with my in-laws, and my wife's from a small island in the Caribbean, and they just went into lockdown like later than everyone else. So I've basically been from like lockdown to lockdown to lockdown, but I had nothing else to do for 3 months other than look at NFTs and trade NFTs, and I had a bit of capital to put into it. So that was the thing that really got me deep into it. Like, I think before that I kind of believed in it a little bit, but I was money there just to trade it. But those 3 months over the summer 2021, which literally was the JPEG summer, I was just in like a very unfortunate part of my life where I could spend a lot of time doing it. And then basically by the time I started my new role, I knew that I wanted to quit and do this stuff full time. And I gave it a chance to do that new role for about 2 or 3 months, but I just knew, my heart wasn't in it anymore. And I just found like the world of crypto and Web3 it was just like so much more exciting than traditional finance. And, so you go from watching things move from like 2 or 3 or 5% a day to watching things do like 1,000x and then drop 99%. And that volatility made me realize there was just so much more opportunity in this space. So over the next 2 or 3 months, I kind of like told my bosses that I just didn't want to do this and transitioned out of my old role and started doing this stuff full time Jan 22.
Just so happened that your leave happened to coincide with max degeneracy period, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It was, people say right place, right time. And for me, that was right place, right time, luckily.
The composition of this market, by the way, is there anything that you can think of that's even close to parallel to it? And equally, why is this market so crazy and volatile? Is it because nascent technology and therefore there's like some security risk and other risks that exist? Is it because we also have a bunch of degenerates in it who, try to push volatility? Is it both of them? Is it more one than the other? Like, what do you think is going on here?
Yeah, it's definitely its nascency. I mean, look, the total market cap of crypto is about $1.2 trillion. And you mentioned NVIDIA earlier, that has a market cap of almost $1 trillion, right? So the total market cap of one company is bigger than all of crypto. So it is still a small asset class, which means when you have a lot of capital coming in, a lot of capital leaving, it will cause big price swings. And that's what we see all the time. And yeah, like this idea of like it's not regulated, there's a lot of degenerate activity. There's a big retail market, so people are not like, a lot of people are not trading with stop losses and trading with risk limits and trading in a institutionalized way. So there are all these factors that definitely I think have an impact for it to trade the way it does. But I do think that will change. I don't know if it will change in NFTs, but it will change in the overall crypto market. I do think once you have proper regulation, you have bigger institutional players and you have more asset managers involved, it will become a lot more liquid and less volatile. But for now, it's going to continue to be the way that it is for structural reasons, I think.
So I'm going to tee up a big loaded question here that we may have to work through a little bit. But I feel like a really interesting frame that you gave, right? If anyone is catching it, is the comp between the whole crypto market, right? 1 trillion, and NVIDIA, which I just happened to randomly bring up. I wish I really intentionally brought it up for comparing what the market cap was. I did not. Nonetheless, we're here. So what do we think is the right comp for the crypto market? Kind of touching back on your original comment about the fact that, like, you can't, there aren't cash flows that exist. There isn't really terminal value that exists even for crypto, right? So what is the right comp? Like, as we're trying to compare Apple's crypto market to something to figure out, is 1 trillion reasonable? Should be a lot bigger than 1 trillion. Like, any idea of what that is? And if you don't have an answer, that's totally okay, because it's a near impossible question maybe, but anything come to mind in terms of like what the right comp is for what this eventually should represent?
That's such a great question, and it's such a tough one because something that people use as a comp is the NASDAQ, and crypto does have a lot of correlation to the NASDAQ. It has a lot of correlation to tech stocks, but recently we've seen that correlation break down. But it's like, how do you comp it? Like within the crypto world, you do have, I would say you have a bunch of tokens that are kind of like tech startups, and they have a token that's trying to solve for some in real life problem. And that token acts as like their valuation, and maybe that's a good comp. Like small cap crypto is maybe like has some kind of like correlation to NASDAQ. But then you have like Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin's not really a tech company. You have Ethereum. Ethereum is not really a tech company, and those two things make up a huge proportion of the crypto market cap. Things like Solana, other L1s, they're not really necessarily tech companies. So it's tough. Like tech infrastructure, I don't know. Like maybe you want to look at like stuff like I forget what they're called, like the 5G spectrum stuff, like stuff that I think is infrastructure with a tech focus is a better comp. But it's tough, like 5G spectrum, like how do you even value that? They just get auctioned from time to time, and you just like the last valuation. It's not an active market. So
where my head was going was like, is ETH maybe, Microsoft plus AWS or something? Like since
yeah,
you're
exactly.
around it, like I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Like how do you value AWS? Like maybe Amazon has a breakout valuation for it, but it's very tough. It's very, very tough.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here's the moral of the story, right? The moral of the story, I guess, even though we can't answer this impossible question today, which I had a sense was impossible in advance, is I still think the point that that OSF made earlier is a salient one, which is NVIDIA is $1 trillion, and all of crypto is still only $1 trillion. And I think we could all argue and agree that if we still buy into it, which I think we all do, $1 it's a bigger thing in aggregate than just NVIDIA is, probably, right? I think directionally we can probably say that that's the case. So if nothing else, we maybe take that away today. So back to normal project land for what everyone knows you for. So let's start with maybe Degen specifically. To hear about what your approach was with Degens, and what was the process experience like for you of creating, evolving that project, kind of what your mindset was throughout? How did that go?
Yeah, so Degens was a project that I did with my friend Mando in summer of 2021, and I think we didn't really know what we were doing. We were still kind of new to the NFT space, and I did this during lockdown, so it was kind of like hey, what should I do? Spend my time on? And I think the idea was like, this is a PFP, and we were going to like make a comic strip out of it, and maybe a cartoon and an IP play and all that kind of stuff. And it just turned out that it didn't work. Like we weren't very good at managing and building a community. We didn't know anything about IP players and cartoons and that kind of stuff. So the project ended up going to zero by the end of the year, and we were just in this tough spot because we didn't have the wrong intentions, but we were just unsuccessful, frankly, at doing what we did there. So our idea was like, well, why don't we just pivot it to doing something that we were actually good at and had some real interest in. And, we were both traders. We had an idea of how to invest and how to allocate capital. So we basically changed the whole thing to like, if you owned one of these PFPs, you could get access to the daily commentary that we wrote, we started writing like research reports on the NFT projects, and they weren't like the classic alpha group pump, hey, everyone buy this, like kind of stuff. It was like, hey, I've looked at this project. This is what I think of the plus points of it. This is what I think of the negative points of it. And the idea is to give you the tools to understand the thought process to let you go ahead and make your own decisions. And our thought was like, if we can just teach people to think the way that they think, they don't need to ask me, should I buy this project? They're going to be able to evaluate that decision for themselves and start taking proprietary risks. So that was the idea behind that. And, over the last year or so, we built a whole analytics platform. So if you go to the website, dgens.finance, you can see, you can get all the stats and across the entire NFT space. I think we've written over 300 different reports and various NFT projects. So it really has become like this cool research an analytics hub for the NFT space, and also we've branched out into some crypto tokens as well. But I think that was an example of something where like what we didn't work the first time around, and it went to zero. And I think a lot of projects have that problem, but we didn't just desert it. We converted it into something that would work, and we didn't do another sale. Like we brought along those original supporters for this project, and hopefully we did them proud and returned some value. And like the other projects we've gone on to do, like Rektguy is one of them, was actually a free mint for all DGens holders as well. So the real takeaway for me from that was like, it's okay to mess up, it's okay to fail. Most startups do fail, but if you're selling things to an NFT community and you go on to do a new project, it's nice to bring along your original supporters and give them at least something from the original capital they put into you. So that was the main thing that I learned from that.
I definitely want to touch on that in a second or two. Before we get to that, I'm just curious, why do you think DGens failed or didn't succeed originally, would you say? Like if you had to dissect it going back, obviously you evolved it to something where where your real skill was, right, which was the kind of the research side of things, sounds like more for like the midterm or investor side of things. I think the project originally did not succeed, if you had to say.
It didn't succeed because I think we didn't believe in what we were doing. I think we didn't enjoy what we were doing. And it was okay for me to say at the time, well, we're not very good at managing a community, but now we have an amazing community, and we've somehow managed to do that. So I think the real thing is that we just didn't believe it. Like we didn't believe it, and we weren't good at it, and that was a problem. Like even not being good at it is not the problem. We just didn't. You got to have that belief. And when we then switched into when we sat down, I was like, well, what do we actually believe could be valuable? That's when everything changed, and it just gave us the enthusiasm and incentive to like work on it. And when you do that as a founder, you really like telegraph how you feel with these things. You really people can really get an impression, and you can see it. Like you may see like the Doodles founder saying random stuff in the Discord and it doesn't look great, but then you may see like I don't know, Ugalaz founder saying something great and everyone loves it, or Pudgy Penguin's doing really well. Like I really do believe founders, even just through words on Twitter, telegraph like a certain aura. And if you're not believing in what you're doing, it's impossible for you to telegraph an aura of positivity. But if you do believe in it, then you start telegraphing positivity. Then people in your community start to appreciate you and enjoy you. Then the vibes change very, very quickly. But it all comes from that original belief, and we just didn't have it for DGens.
I'm kind of kicking myself, by the way, under the chair right now. Because I have a lot of familiarity also being, a startup founder, entrepreneur, all those kinds of things. But B, I kind of feel, I don't know if you've ever if you're a sports person or if you saw that press conference 3 or 4 weeks ago from Giannis, where he speaks to this reporter, Eric, right? And he's like, we did not fail, Eric. You did not fail. And I'm kicking myself for using the term, why did it not succeed? Because it's, of course, very, very, very linear over time. And even though the first approach didn't work, doesn't mean it did not work, of course, in this case. So, and totally appreciate where you're coming from. I mean, it's definitely an evolution, and equally really cool that you're open to sharing, with the issues that existed originally and how you kind of adjusted and pivoted. So back to that kind of allegiance comment that you made, which is I think a really important one of, you kind of shared the premise of, it didn't go exactly how we wanted it to go originally. So we evolved it to something that we were more solid in, had were around our core competencies, and therefore return value to kind of all of our holders, and then evolved it even beyond that as well. So I guess the question I have for you is, what is the reasonable expectation when people mint a project of what to expect? Is it the promise, like what's the line? Is it the promise of endless pivoting? Is it the promise of at least some pivoting and trying? Is there just an inherent possibility of project failure? And like, I don't feel like that's very clear. And there's like a clear, not that there has to be, but like a clear party line that exists about what to expect out of a project. Or is it just like there's different humans that exist, and no matter how much we evolve it, regulation on top of it, whatever else it is, there's still just going to be variance where some projects fail for a variety of reasons, some evolve for a variety of reasons, some get it right the first try. That's just how the mix is always going to be.
Yeah, that's such a good question. That's a really, really important question. And I think to improve transparency, projects started having roadmaps. So it was like, hey, these are things that you can measure our success on, and we'll go out there and try and execute them. And I think what happened in the end was that was actually abused, where projects would have these very lofty roadmaps and then have no intention of actually completing them, or they had no ability of completing them. And then we went through this like meta, which I think still kind of exists, where like projects don't really have roadmaps, but there is like this kind of like baked in expectation that they're going to try and do or build something with it. And I think it's a twofold thing. I think as a founder or a creator, you have to expect that people buying into your project, the number one thing they mainly really want is for the price to go up. And they want you to take action to make that price go up. So if you go out there and say, we're going to drop you an ERC20 token and it's going to underpin the metaverse game, if you go out there and achieve it, then the price should go up based on that, and those guys are happy. And if you fail at that, the price will not go up. But it's when, like, I don't know, Doodles, I think, is a great example where, like, they wanted to go out there, and Doodles were always very clear about what they wanted to do. They were like, we want to build, like, we want to onboard the masses, we want to build, like, a big media company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess the idea was, like, if we succeed at this, then Doodles will have such a great brand and great IP that these NFTs will be worth something. And I think NFT holders misunderstood all that stuff for, like, these guys are going to do things to try and, like, drive specific value to the NFTs, just like you saw with Yuga Labs, and that never really happened. And that was an example where, like, even though the founders were very clear in their ideas and expectations, NFT holders still just either chose to ignore it or just had the wrong view, and there's a mismatch in expectations, and that's why there was this big fallout. And then Doodles were like, we're not going to be an NFT company anymore. So it's a real tough one. I think, I don't know, like, what should you expect when you buy something? I think if you buy anything in this world, you should basically be ready to expect zero and not get angry if it does go to zero, if people mess up, because if you're thinking about your risk in terms of all the money you have in the world, like, cash in the bank should be the lowest risk, and then maybe you buy some stocks, which is slightly higher risk, maybe you buy some crypto, which is even higher risk, then maybe you buy some NFT, which is extremely high risk. So you just have to be ready and willing for this stuff to go to zero. And so for me personally, when I buy things, I just try have zero expectations.
Yeah, that's a good frame. That definitely makes a lot of sense. So okay, so you had that as background, right? You evolved your first project, and then, as you mentioned, Rektguy came in as well. Where did Rektguy come from? What was kind of the seed of thought that existed there? It's also really nice because your background, and I think we only touched on this briefly right now, is you were an artist before, right? When you had your day job, you were heavy into art. It isn't out of left field necessarily, right? Like, you come from that background. So at what point did the idea of Rektguy come in? What was your thought process behind creating it?
Yeah, so I just basically one day, when I still had my old job, I was doodling something on a piece of paper, and it was basically like a skeleton skull kind of guy holding a coffee mug. And I don't know, I just kind of liked it. So I actually made that piece into like a 1-of-1 on Foundation, and that was the first piece that I minted. And someone bought it. I guess they kind of liked it. And this character basically was just recurring in all the pieces that I did. And I thought, oh, maybe it'd be cool just to, like, make it a PFP, because, like, I just felt like this character had something about it, and I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was at this point in time. And it wasn't called Rektguy at this point in time, but it was just kind of like, this is like a degen in the crypto world, like punching around NFTs and crypto, losing money, making money, and just like basically all of us, right? That was what this character was. So I had the idea to make it into PFP. And I just love, like, the idea of it drinking, like downing like a bottle of something. Just, I feel like that action of, like, holding a whole bottle and drinking from it in a very aggressive manner just shows carelessness and recklessness and full, like, degeneracy. And the way it came out was like really powerful. So that was the pose that I wanted to draw it in. And I wanted to create a piece of art / PFP that was different to everything else out there. And at the time, every PFP was like it was like Doodles, Cool Cats, Alien Friends, Cool Man, like all this like pastel colored background with like cute furry animals. And I was like, well, there's so much of this stuff. And also, like, this isn't really what life is about. Like, life's not all just like happy sunshine, rainbows and stuff. Like, especially in crypto, there's this other side to it, which is like the reality of it. So I wanted to create something that thematically and aesthetically reflected that, And so I was like, well, let me just flip this whole narrative on its head. Instead of having a pastel pink background, let me have a black background. And instead of having nice dark bold lines, let me have like neon lines and like flashing lights and images. And let me make it animated. There weren't many or any animated PFPs at the time. So the idea was for it to be like this hard hitting thing that was something very different. And it took me a while to make it. Like I had the idea to make it in January in 2021. I just did it as a side passion project, really. It was never meant to be this big thing. And it took me, I think, about 5 months to finish the art. I got my brothers to learn Solidity and do all the smart contract stuff. And we just did it all in-house, really, like homegrown. And then we just launched it as a free mint. And it was a free mint for anyone who held any of my existing art, or if anyone had a DGens PFP, they got a free mint for it.
Amazing. It sounds so obvious now that you're saying it, by the way, but if I can tell you the number of people who have come to me who have come up, like knock me for using light mode on, Discord or other places and trying to push me to dark mode. And yet everyone's gravitating, like you said, towards pastel colored light background things, when in reality, we all know that like 90% of people in NFT land like dark mode and like exactly what you're talking about, right? So it suggests to me that like, back to our other part of the conversation, the reason buying this stuff is probably because maybe some people like it, like, project, right, that has pastel colors and whatever. Equally, probably because they think other people will like it at the end of the day, right? There's that upside that exists because you're right, it doesn't link so well with what communities on average seem to like and seem to gravitate towards. It feels like, at least. I don't know.
Yeah. It's funny because I also use light mode. I use light mode on Discord and I use light mode on Twitter as well, and on my phone. I've actually now switched it to using dark mode after the sun sets and it gets dark, because I think apparently that's better for my eyes, but I don't know if that's true or not. But yeah, I'm the same. Funny enough, I like, despite all the art that I produce, that's all very like dark in theme and often in color, I actually just use light mode because it feels better on my eyes.
That makes sense. Earmuffs to everybody listening, but I feel like we're going to get some hate mail afterwards about using light mode. I'm nervous about this coming off of the show at this point. Now, currently, like, how do you think about managing your brand and Rektguy, and everything that you're touching? Like, are you actively thinking about that and like road mapping, like when you're going to interact, whatever? Do you just kind of take it day by day? Like, how do you think about that and structure that all out?
Yeah, I think so. With Rektguy, it famously doesn't have a roadmap, and so that sometimes makes it difficult to think like, what are we going to do next? Where are we going to take it? All that kind of stuff. And I think the main thing for us is like, and look, we're in a bear market right now, and it's tough. And for me, that's a massive opportunity because I think it allows you to earn your stripes, and it allows you to prove that you're here for the right reasons. And I remember when I came here in 2021, I was like, damn, I can never compete with any of these OGs because they've lived through these bear markets and people respect them for it. So when we got presented with the bear market, at first I was like, this kind of sucks, but now I have an opportunity to prove that I'm here for the right reasons. So for Rektguy, it's just community stuff. It's just keeping the community alive. It's tweeting about it, like hanging out in our Discord. We have real life events 3 or 4 times a year. It's just making people feel like they're part of something. And I just think that's so much more powerful than saying, oh, we're going to, drop a token, or we're going to do an airdrop, or we're going to like build this game and all that kind of stuff. And if you look at, we just launched our new Rektguy website, and the website's rektguy.com. If you look at it, it's just a website about collecting Rektguy. Like, we have a leaderboard for top collectors. We have recent activity. We have a lot of lore within the Rektguy. So we've typed that up onto the website in a wiki. People like collecting different trait sets. So we've actually put that onto the website where every ETH address has their own profile, and you can see all the different collecting badges they've earned. So we just want to it's a very much like a community thing, and we just want to build the tools to empower the community and let the community thrive. And honestly, I genuinely really, really believe that is enough to make a project extremely successful, because the advantage we have over other projects that have raised capital, that have funding, that have crazy valuations, is our value is not predicated on us going out there, returning value to investors, or fulfilling a roadmap, or doing these certain things that everyone is expecting and having baked in value. Our value is predicated on Rektguy just being Rektguy, and that's the thing that I want to just keep pushing and driving. And I think we've done a good job at that. We've been around for a year. We've done a good job of that, doing it through a bear market, and obviously bear markets help us because it's kind of like in theme. And the longer we can do that, the more valuable we're going to be in the future. And that's basically like the ideologies that I think I have right now in my head.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, related to that, is there a need to progress this kind of lore or narrative, like actively progress this lore narrative that exists with Rektguy? Like, is that something that's necessary to kind of progress this, even though that's not a roadmap per se, right? But with a project that's not about, like you said, creating metaverses or games or whatever else, you have to do something like that? Does that naturally kind of take care of itself because the community is all attached to it and naturally evolves it? Like, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because you can't just sit back. At the same time, you can't just sit back and do nothing, right? So you have to let people, you have to empower people to carry the story. And if I just write a tweet and say, hey, this is what Rektguy is about, and here's the lore and here's the culture and all that kind of stuff, and I've done it before, but it doesn't have as much impact as if lots of people are doing it and talking about it. But the question is, how do you create and build the tools and empower them or give them the content to do that? And I think that's the main thing we're focused on. And again, like, that's the idea with the website. The website has all the stuff where you can like take screenshots and post them on Twitter and make people feel like they want to collect and be a part of something. And that's something that we've built that then allows people to use and share that content. And I think we want to do more of that kind of stuff, basically. But yeah, to your point, like, it doesn't mean we can just sit back and just think, oh, the story will tell itself. It doesn't mean that we go out there and actually tell the story ourselves, but how do we build the tools to allow the story to be told in the most effective way?
Cool. That's a really good layout. That makes a lot of sense. So at the current juncture we're at right now, right, of May 25th, 23, kind of bearish market, like you said, we all have hopes that'll sometime soon. You know, what's next in general? So not just for Rektguy for you, but in general, you know, what's next? Where are you trying to go with your overall brand and your projects? What should we expect from you, OSF? Would you say, if you thought about that?
Yeah, I'm really focused on the art side of things on my side. So, I release one-of-ones from time to time. I haven't released like a new collection yet this year, and there's something that I've been working on probably since December last year, but because I have my fingers in so many pies, I just haven't had the time to work on it as much as I wanted to. But definitely in the second half of the year, it's something that I hope to release. It's just going to be an art collection, but I think it's a cool idea that I have behind it. And that's something, I think that's going to be my next focus in terms of like, not drop everything else, but like stop doing the collaboration stuff and the partnership stuff. And maybe you guys are lucky because I might put the podcast on hold as well, so I can focus on this. And then, look to get this thing out in the next 2 or 3 months.
That'd be amazing. One bonus question for you. I'm curious to hear your reaction before we head towards wrapping up. Concept of like AI art, which is, we know in Web3 has been around for a while with generative and otherwise, but obviously has grown in popularity over the last 6 months, let's say, right? Do you have a reaction to that? If an artist is creating, be it with AI tools or otherwise, automating part of it, not, whatever, does that matter at the end of the day? Is it really just about the end product and what it conveys in the story and all that? Like, we know this is going to become more and more of a thing, especially as things get automated, projects get automated. People even, diverse creations that have some one-of-ones in it, but just use, automation in it. Does that matter at the end of the day? Like, what's your stance on this?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I think at the end of the day, AI is just a tool that allows you to achieve what you want to achieve. And there is something to be said for someone having the idea in the first place. And you might be someone who's like, oh, I have a great idea for a piece of art or something creative, but I just don't have the ability to do it. Now you can go ahead and actually do it. But is that more impressive or valuable than someone who actually had the idea and drew it and created it themselves? I think the answer is probably no. And a good analogy for this, and this is why I always say when I get asked this question, it's like, you might have someone like Taylor Swift and she writes her own songs and she performs her own songs. Or you might have someone like Justin Bieber who doesn't write his own songs, but he performs them. Which of the two of them are more talented? Most people will probably say Taylor Swift is. At the same time, you may have a songwriter who wrote Justin Bieber's songs, and they have some talent in writing songs and being creative there, but are they more talented than Taylor Swift? Well, maybe not, because Taylor was able to write and perform. but it doesn't mean they're like not creative or don't have any ability and shouldn't be respected and get some credit. So I think like the use of AI for art it's not exactly the same, but it's a similar kind of concept, I think, in my opinion.
That's I thought you were going to go with a different analogy. I thought you were going to go with something more like handwritten notes versus like email, for instance, right? And the parallel that exists there. But I like yours better. We'll definitely run with yours instead. So this has been just an absolutely fantastic conversation and hearing structure things. It's not often we get somebody on here who's on the art side of things, but also has kind of the technical background as well to like dissect things. It's pretty unusual background. So really, really appreciate you talking through everything and really pulling back the curtain fully on what you were thinking and what it felt like through the process and otherwise. So again, you have a lot of fans in here. We really appreciate you a whole lot. Listening live, certainly appreciate you like always. We'll be on at a similar time next week, like always. So thank you so much again, OSF. Really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot for having me, guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you both. That was fantastic. OSF, thank you so much for taking the time to come in, man. That was a wonderful conversation.